listeners of Illusion to Temporal Discussion, the episode-by-episode Knightmare retrospective podcast. I'm Martin Harder, and I am quite a little gastronome.
And I'm Martin O'Doney, and I am quite a big ball of gas.
And joining us today, we have the former editor of the iShield fanzine, Paul McIntosh. Paul edited the paper version of the magazine between December 1995 and December 1997.
Before Jake Collins took over.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Are we leaving it at that, or do you want to do it again?
Paul edited the paper version of the magazine between December 1995 and December 1997, before Jake Collins took over.
There we go. That'll slot in.
Yes.
That's seamless. In fact, we won't even bother removing the rest of it. It goes so smoothly and so naturally from. See what I have to prop up here. You see the level of the presenting that I have to compensate.
Paul, can you tell us about like the ins and outs of producing a fan-made magazine at that time?
Yeah, I mean, it really is like talking about a different era entirely. I mean, there is part of me that thinks, where did that person go? Because I must have had some degree of initiative to actually, with no online options or anything, to get in touch with people and interview people and do all of those sort of things. There was that element. I am quite proud of it, but equally the writing and the extensive use of clip art is just it's a bit cringy.
You got to remember the technical limitations of the time. So in some ways, you're actually doing what the series is doing, which was you were at the cutting edge of software. Unfortunately, that edge looks a little bit blunt these days.
When I think back to sort of series 3 and 4, that was around that time we got a video recorder at home. So although I'd watched some of the early episodes, I'd watched them once and that was it, and I'd never seen them again. So I immediately sort of was on the back foot in terms of what I could recall. But in terms of the program itself, I loved the Adventurers Club when that was formed. I loved that it existed, but the magazine was always a little bit thin.
It was more like a leaflet than a magazine in some ways, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I always felt like it was such a thing that would lend itself to fanzines, and that fanzine culture was a very different thing back in the 80s and 90s. It was everywhere with sort of football or sci-fi or whatever. So I just sort of felt like if nobody else is going to do something like this, then it's going to have to be me. And yeah, it sort of coincided, unfortunately, with Knightmare gradually sort of grinding to a halt, which is a shame because I'd sort of had the idea brewing for a little while, but then it ended up sort of morphing into the Bring Back Knightmare campaign, which felt like it gave it a bit of purpose rather than just being pure nostalgia.
In some ways, you could see for the iShield itself, it was actually kind of a good thing, the timing, because basically the Knightmare Adventures Club was about to close down. And so they needed somebody to pass it on to. So that sort of made you central to what was left of the Knightmare fandom at that point, which you might not have been otherwise.
In terms of timing, it was good in that regard, but I was in sort of quite regular contact with the production team just through like fan mail and just generally sending letters in, probably more often than is legally acceptable, but I did it anyway. And they were lovely. I mean, they were extremely patient. When I read back to some of because I've kept all the letters they sent back to me, and it's, there is a definite undertone at times of, thank you for getting in touch, and you perhaps don't need to write in quite as often as this, but it was handled very gently. And yeah, so I think that I kind of had a route in, and when the opportunity came to actually do something with a mixture of interviews and nostalgia bits and things like that, I just thought, well, yeah, let's just give it a go. And the plan, I think, has been documented, was that they would include a flyer with the final episode of The Quest, the fan club magazine, and that would sort of point people towards me if they wanted to stay in touch with that world. But in the event, they sent the final issue out and forgot to include the flyer. So I think there was a tiny batch that went out with that included, but it sort of turned what could have been hundreds of readers into tens of readers. So it was a bit of a scrap. And then obviously when the program is not on TV anymore, it's not an active going concern. So the prospect of drawing new people in when there's no internet was tough. You try bits and pieces. There was sort of sci-fi magazines and things that I tried to advertise in, but Knightmare never really sort of fully inhabited that sci-fi universe. I think it sort of sat on that borderline between the sci-fi nerd and the children's TV fan, and kind of fell between those two stools in terms of trying to reach people. But nevertheless, I enjoyed it. It was a great chance to communicate with people about a topic that I really loved and cared about. And that seems, again, like you're talking about a different era and a different time, because that is the easiest thing in the world to do now online. But at that point, making connections with people like Jake and Rosie Collins and various other people who, it's something sort of bordering on pen friend and contributor, because you sort of make these connections with people that you just otherwise never would. So there was a lot of positives that came from it, and I really enjoyed doing it. If I was to express one regret about it, is that I think I just found by the end the Enterprise was just getting so frustrating, because naturally readership dwindled because there was nothing to keep people engaged with Knightmare as a concept. It wasn't there anymore on TV. I always saw a fanzine as being something that was of the readers rather than just for the readers. So I started to just get frustrated with the fact that there was, there's this sort of existential crisis of what am I doing this for? Who is it for? There's only a handful of people left. And
I get that feeling every time I'm writing a script for an audio play. So,
you have to sort of draw into your reserves of willpower, don't you, a little bit at times.
A lot, yeah, an awful lot.
Yeah. But and it was at that point I was sort of 19, 20. I'd started at university, and it sort of felt like it had come to a natural end. But the fact that further down the line, Jake was able to pick that up and run with it for such a long time that he did afterwards. And, all ego aside, the fact that he continued some of the elements of it that I'd put in back in 97, or was it 95? It was 95 when it started. He sort of added his own new elements, but sort of kept some bits in there. It just felt lovely to think that it had a new form and a new life in a sort of different era. So yeah, I'll be eternally grateful that Jake did that, because he was such a big presence in it from pretty much day one anyway. He was such an active participant. So yeah, it was great. When the Knightmare convention happened in Norwich, I'm trying to remember when that was, 2014, 16?
2013.
2013, bloody hell.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I went to that is the one and only time in my life that somebody has approached me and said, "Are you the Paul McIntosh?" And that was that was probably never going to happen to me again. But it was Ben Maiden, who again was like a very active participant to the early issues. He was a great sort of part of that early community, and yeah, it was lovely to sort of feel like, however fractionally tiny it was, that I sort of played some part in some people's memories of the program.
Today we're looking at Series 4, Episode 12. This was originally broadcast on Friday, November the 23rd, 1990. Unchained Melody by the Righteous Brothers spent its 5th consecutive week at number 1, thanks to its inclusion in the movie Ghost, which was spending its 8th week at the top of the UK box office.
I've said it before, at least it's a good song and a good movie.
Yeah, but after 8 weeks, you don't want to talk about it anymore, do you? If you are, like me, getting more than a little sick of the Patrick Swayze train, though, don't worry. This is the film's final week at number 1, thanks to next week featuring the introduction of an 80s and 90s pop culture phenomenon that is still going rather strong today. We have got absolutely nothing left to say about either Ghost or the Righteous Brothers here. Paul, do you have any thoughts to offer? Because otherwise,
I think the main thing that strikes me just from the sheer length of time those things were there at number 1 is time passes at a different speed when you were younger, because I don't think I comprehended how long they were up there. It felt like it was big for maybe 10 minutes and then it moved on and something else stepped in. But God, that's a huge chunk of 1990.
With movies, it works a little differently today because the home market is so big today compared to what it was back then. They used to keep films in the cinema for as long as they were popular, because quite often that was the only way you were going to see it for about 3 to 6 months. Whereas now they just want to rush everything to DVD or streaming as quickly as possible, because that's where the money is now.
Also, I think there is a phenomenon that I've noticed as I've got much, much older, incredibly old, is time in the past seems to compress. Whole years of events all get merged into one big blur, and I'm sure that it didn't look that way back when I was a kid. So it could be that at the time it may not have seemed that long that it was at number 1. Looking back at it now, that time does look very compressed into just a small space of time, and it may be that's actually is what you're reacting to.
Yeah, I think there's also an element of, I don't know if this is true everywhere, but I guess it was, that we had kind of like remnants of old suburban picture house type cinemas. So we had the big city centre ones, and then once they'd been at those big cinemas for maybe 3-4 weeks, they would sort of step down a tier and they'd be released all over again at these. So it kind of prolonged the life, because I remember going to, it's called Jesmond Picture House, which is where we would go because I'm one of 4 kids, so it was cheaper to wait until the big movies had sort of gone to these places, and then we would go as a family to watch Back to the Future or whatever it might be. So I think that sort of prolonged things from being a 3-week hit into a 5, 6, 7, 8 week hit like Ghost seems to have done. But I was just oblivious at the time. I knew it was big, but I didn't know it was that big.
Temporal discussion. Bringing you the latest news from 1990.
Okay, just a warning, this section will contain political opinions. I don't think I'm going to be able to hold Martin back on this one.
Yeah, I'm from the northeast of England, so you can imagine that my opinions are probably broadly in line.
On November the 22nd, the day before this episode aired, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher announced that she would not contest the second ballot of the Conservative Party's leadership election. On November the 14th, 1990, Michael Heseltine, a former Defence and Environment Secretary, decided to run against Thatcher for the Conservative Party leadership, which prompted the demand for the election.
Mm-hmm. And I've always felt that Heseltine was a little bit too much of an egotist, and I don't think he ever realised that he didn't have nearly enough support in the party. He was, by the Tory standards of the time, a left-winger. It meant that the right half of the party actually couldn't stand him. And I don't think he ever quite grasped that. If he'd handled things a bit more carefully, he probably would have been Prime Minister.
Well, I think he realised after the first ballot, didn't he?
I think he did, yeah. I think he did.
He didn't stand for the second one.
Somebody else didn't.
Thatcher's increasingly polarising and aggressive style was hurting her standing in the UK in the months before the election. Her community charge had proven immensely unpopular and had sparked nationwide protests, and her Euroscepticism had started to work against the Conservatives. Due to excessive inflation, the once booming economy was now in the early phases of a recession. Thatcher's notorious rejection of the European community's plans for more integration in October marked a turning point in the crisis and forced the resignation of her longest-serving minister, Geoffrey Howe. Heseltine immediately resigned and challenged Thatcher to a contest in November.
It was the loss of Howe's support that proved the point of no return for Thatcher. He was, and I don't like praising him, but it's still true, he was by far the most able minister in her cabinet. She never realised how lucky she was to have him there, if I'm being quite honest, because he was an excellent legislator. You may not like his policies, but his legislation skills and ability to get them through Parliament were outstanding.
I think Kenneth Clarke was another example of that. I think there are certain people who, just by being a Tory who vaguely seems like a human being, you can go quite a long way.
He was very loyal to her, and frankly, he never got any reward for being loyal to her. It's notorious that in cabinet meetings, she would always insult his manhood. She was constantly throwing insults at him in front of everybody else, and he just took it, which actually shows he had quite a strength of character as well. It got to the point where it wasn't just a personal issue for him, it was also a professional one. She was making it impossible for ministers to change details in policies to make it fit the circumstances better. And that led to him making that famous speech when he compared her to an England cricket captain who breaks the bats before they go out to face the bowling. And that speech is nowadays largely accepted as the moment when Thatcher was doomed. As soon as he was gone, there really wasn't anybody else with enough ability who was prepared to stick by her. Her legacy, you could say, has been helped by her removal at that particular time, though, because by being overthrown, she's now seen by history as a victim of betrayal. A lot of people do actually feel sympathy for her about that. She also left office exactly the moment that the negative consequences of her economic incompetence, and it is incompetence, believe me, was really starting to bite. So the blame for all of that was largely pinned on her successor. Not that John Major is blameless. He was Chancellor of the Exchequer whilst all these silly policies were being enacted, like joining the exchange rate mechanism. That was really stupid.
Thatcher was persuaded to withdraw from the second round of voting after failing to win outright on the first round, missing the threshold by only 4 votes. She resigned on November the 22nd, 1990, after more than 15 years as Conservative leader and 11 years as Prime Minister. So I think maybe Heseltine didn't stand for the second ballot because he'd basically done what he aimed to do, hadn't he, which was to get Thatcher out.
Nobody should be in any doubt that Heseltine did desperately want to be Prime Minister. He was interviewed about it about 12 years later, and he almost burst into tears about failing. So there's no doubt he definitely wanted to be Prime Minister for its own sake. But yeah, he was very much from the opposite wing of the party from Thatcher, and he hardly ever agreed with her about anything. And so he did take the consolation of saying that he was the guy who arguably got rid of Thatcher. Well, I say again, it was actually the loss of Howe that really killed her. But once she failed to win the first ballot outright, it was clear that she was going to get beaten in the second round. Heseltine drops out, which means he doesn't split the support with whoever else opposes her. And somebody else was going to come in and get the majority support from the party. It was very clear that Thatcher was finished.
Greetings! The undefeated dungeon salutes you and bids you welcome. You'll understand I take no pleasure in the failure of your champions to defeat our humble obstacles. I am myself quite neutral. As is our friend here, Pickle. Aren't you, Pickle?
Yes, Master.
Yes, of course you are. And just to prove it, let's have a dispassionate and unbiased assessment of our latest hopefuls. Pickle?
As you will, Master. Here are Dom and Tim and Prav, all from Torquay by the sea, I see. Dom's brother Dickon walks the dungeon path in search of a crown. Time in quest, over 20 minutes. They're in level 2, Master, and carrying a rather suspect bottle of brandy.
If you're a fan of the show, and judging by the fact you're listening, then you probably are. You probably don't need too much introduction to this team. They are one of the more well-known teams of the series, and this time it's for mostly the right reasons. Dickon, Dominic, Tim, and Praveen all hail from Torquay. The bottle of brandy they are carrying was entrusted to them by Hodris to be delivered to Brother Mace in a sort of reverse fetch quest. It is implied to be magical in nature and is involved in Hodris's payback to Mace for recently slighting him. I don't know if you're aware of it, there's a sort of 90s retro football podcast called Quickly Kevin that Josh Widdicombe, the comedian, co-hosts. And fairly recently, Knightmare came up in conversation. And Josh Widdicombe is from Devon. And I think he went to a primary school that was right out in the middle of nowhere. So I think there was 15 kids in the entire school. And he just sort of casually mentioned nobody ever used to win Knightmare, but there's some kids from my school went on it and they actually won. And I thought, well, I was probably the only person who was screaming at the podcast thinking I know exactly which team that was.
We've got to remember, actually, that in consecutive years, 2 teams from Devon actually won Knightmare because
that's true, yes.
Because in season 5, a team from my town actually won it as well. So Devon is the best. You're just gonna have to live with that, Mr. H.
Yeah, well, now my mind's just working trying to figure out ways I can get Josh Widdicombe onto the podcast.
It's a good idea, actually. Try asking him. Have you thought of that?
Wow, that'd be an idea.
There's a breakthrough. The master strategist strikes again.
Who knows? Perhaps the dungeon has a worthy foe. But enough of conjecture. Time now for action. For the path is waiting, and the game's afoot.
Well, Master, they have indeed discovered a jester. And knowing jesters, he almost certainly did something to deserve this.
Oh, mercy! 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 I promise he's not to tell it anymore. I promise it's why. I can't even remember the punchline. Oh, take pity! Take pity! And take yourself over here and for goblin's sake, get us out of this contraption!
It's Motley that's trapped in the pillory today, and he pleads to Dickon to let him out. The team tell Dickon to ask Motley for information in return for letting him out, and Dickon does so. Motley offers to guide him through the level until the going gets rough.
In other words, not at all.
The team decide to take pity on him, and they let him out.
Ah, does it? I want Mogdred to win.
What is your name, by the way?
Dickon.
Dickon. Dickon. My mate Dickon, he ain't no chicken. Well, I am, of course, Motley. Official jester to this here place by courtesy of, well, I can't really say. But it ain't the opposition, Dickon. Nah, they don't go in a lot for humour, you see. Which is why I got turned over for telling the one about the 3 assassins and the sorceress. Do you know it? No. Well, it's a bit saucy, if you know what I mean.
I just want it placed firmly on record that for the pun, my mate Dickon, he ain't no chicken, Motley is by far and away the most evil character in Knightmare, and I definitely want him to lose.
I was thinking as I rewatched that scene, just specifically how much it would be upsetting you, because there's a lot of sort of peak Motley in that scene, isn't there?
It hurts quite a bit.
Motley introduces himself, and we get a close-up of them together. During the close-up, we can see how far back the Helmet of Justice is sitting on Dickon's head, revealing it's likely he can actually see pretty much the entire room.
I don't want to accuse Dickon of cheating here.
I don't think he was. I think it's just...
I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get over the bitterness I'm feeling over him freeing Motley. So yeah, he's not cheating really. He just...
It does feel like something that the production team probably should have stopped.
They often did clamp down on that. They often had to with some Dungeoneers because they'd often tilt their head all the way back, and sometimes they'd have to slap a blindfold on them to get them to stop doing it.
We've had Dungeoneers on the podcast that have said that they actually did get caught cheating and had to put the blindfold on.
But Dickon seems to get away with it, or Well, I suppose if we watch some of the later scenes, his head isn't tilted back, so maybe he got a warning between scenes at one point.
I just say it's quite possible it's just that one shot.
Yeah.
I figured it wasn't really worth doing anything about it because he's just stood there talking to Motley at the time.
He had to have his head back earlier, of course, so that he could see the pillory to open it, and he may just not have bothered lowering his head again afterwards.
There's also a lot of stuff on the floor. There's, if I remember rightly, there's lots of bones and bits and pieces, so maybe they allowed him to do it just so that he didn't trip and break his neck or something.
Anyway, let's not linger about here. Otherwise, the opposition might send someone to check on me. So, come on, I think we better be off. Yap-a-doop-a-dip-dip-doo. Oh, my God, it's an ogre! Did you bring him with you? Quick, Dickon, I'll guide you. And in a straight line, that's it.
I was so struck in this scene as Motley leads them out that, I mean, it's a traditional Nightmare thing to have something to sort of chase a team out of the room to add a bit of tension and drama, but they could have used a skull ghost or something there. It just seems like a lot of time spent in makeup for that ogre to appear for maybe about 4 seconds, and then he's not even in the next room, he's just gone again.
Is it Brian McNerney, the guy who plays the ogre? He seems to have nothing but fond memories of that from what we know, but you do sometimes wonder, is it really worth getting dressed up like that for what tend to be very, very brief appearances?
Well, if he liked it that much, maybe he has to do it.
Maybe he just liked the money. I don't know. Can't blame him for that.
He might turn up dressed like that every morning, just hoping that they'll give him a call.
Oh, all right, Brian. I'll put in a scene with the ogre just so you can.
It's probably a contract thing where he has to appear a certain amount of times.
Yeah, quite possibly.
It is better to have somebody there hurrying things on along a bit rather than just saying, you're wasting life force.
Nothing will ever be as good as the automatum, though, for that. That was permanently terrifying.
That's the Dickon.
Another door monster, perhaps, Master. Time for the calling, methinks.
Yes, but do they remember the right words? So much to remember, and such a short time to do it in.
You want me to say it? Okay, Dick, are you ready to do the chant again?
Which one? The true and false?
Yeah, true and false.
False and true. Open up and let us through.
True and false, false and true. Open up and let us through.
This one, I believe, is called Dorcas. Not quite as miserable as Doris, but not the life and soul of the party either.
Oh, weariness! Ah, despair! Ah, the bitter pill of self-delusion.
Oh, what a drag. I wish someone would give it a pill and shut it up. I don't know, though. On second thoughts, it is shut.
Truth will open. Truth will out.
So, Dickon and Motley have arrived in the Dormonster chamber, and the team give Dickon the calling, and he repeats it, and we all know it by now, so let's not dwell on that. Motley laments that he never had any schooling except in comedy, so Dickon will have to answer the questions. Please, just give me a short moment to faint dead away in amazement at the stunning revelation that Motley never went to school.
But also, Motley had schooling in comedy. Like, I once took a driving test. 13 minors, 3 majors, and 2 dangerous.
Yeah. I'm not sure that he went to the very best school you could possibly go to for comedy training.
Just because he went to school, it doesn't mean he passed.
No, it's interesting that he didn't word it that way.
Like Lewis Tully getting his law degree at night school.
Yes, precisely, yes.
The common cold is a bacteria. True or false?
We need a Batman slaps Robin meme for this, except Robin is painted out and Dorcas is put in its place because it's bacterium. Bacteria is plural. I'm astonished at the use of standards people have speaking a Latin language that's been dead for over 1,500 years. It's useful in countless situations. They say false, and they are, of course, correct because it isn't a bacterium anyway, it's a virus.
The common cold is caused by about 200 virus strains, the most frequent of which being rhinoviruses, coronaviruses, adenoviruses, and enteroviruses. They transmit through the air when infected persons come into close contact with each other or indirectly through contact with things in the environment, and then to the mouth or nose. Going to childcare facilities, not sleeping properly, and psychological stress are all risk factors. The symptoms are caused mostly by the body's immunological reaction to the infection, rather than by virus-induced tissue death. Influenza symptoms are comparable to those of a cold, but are generally more severe and less likely to have a runny nose. knows?
I just want to make it clear that when we talk about coronaviruses, everyone always jumps to the same thing, but coronaviruses is a large group of viruses, one of which is COVID-19.
Yeah, it's one of the weird aspects of society's reaction to the COVID-19 pandemic. Everyone was getting agitated about the term coronavirus because apparently they hadn't heard of it before. There's nothing new about coronaviruses. They've been around far longer than mankind. A cold is one of them.
So we are not suggesting that COVID-19 is just a cold.
No, it's not. It certainly isn't. Believe me, I've had it 4 times, Chuck. I know what it's like. But at the same time, there's nothing new about coronaviruses. And as a rule, we will learn to manage COVID-19 in the same way that we learn to manage the cold.
The concept of coronaviruses sort of seemed to enter public knowledge for the first time, basically, in 2019. There was a famous shot, wasn't there, of a supermarket that had been cleaned out of all of the beer except for Corona.
So now we can go back to just not drinking Corona because it tastes like...
Yeah.
Yeah.
The pterodactyl was the world's largest flying animal. True or false?
And they say true, and Dorcas agrees with them. Truth accepted. But it's a bit of an iffy one, isn't it?
Yeah, because pterodactyl is often used as a catch-all term for pterosaurs, but they were actually their own species within the pterosaur area.
I'm pretty sure the pteranodon was a lot bigger than the pterodactyl. In the notes, you've also mentioned the Quetzalcoatlus. I talk about them all the time, you know. It's also a lot bigger than the pterodactyl. I think the difference is these would sort of related dinosaurs living in different eras. I think the pterodactyl, I think it was after the pteranodon and the Quetzal.
This may be due to what was actually known at the time, because obviously we're still discovering a lot about dinosaurs.
30-year-old science is often out of date. Does it mean the largest of all time or the largest of its own time? Because you could interpret it either way.
The largest flying animal that ever existed is believed to be the Quetzal. The wingspan of a fully grown Quetzal averaged around 39 feet, whereas the pterodactyl averaged around 5 feet, so quite a big difference.
Just think about the length of a fully grown human body. It averages out at about 6 foot, and then you've got to multiply that by 6. That is a very, very big wingspan.
How does that compare to sort of contemporary birds of prey? Because I've got no knowledge on this at all.
Definitely bigger.
Yeah, bigger, but I mean, the scale, are we talking sort of 7-8 feet, or is that typically what a large bird of prey would be now?
The largest wingspan of any bird today is the wandering albatross. Albatross! Their wingspan is around 12 feet. And it was at this point of the recording my wife arrived home with some shopping. A hand has just appeared from behind the door and handed some fruit out. So.
Oh, wonderful. Citrus.
And bananas. How they managed to get to a temperate zone, I don't know.
Yes. The debates in science over that will rage for years, I think.
Oh, and there's more. There's apples. There's pears. There's more apples.
The knapsack will be overflowing at this point.
Yes.
Probably 4 or 5 knapsacks.
Bats are blind. True or false?
They say false, and of course that is truth accepted. Some bats are blind, but for the same reason some humans are blind. If bats were all blind, then by definition, evolution would have got rid of their eyes by now. Their eyes respond to very, very different wavelengths and different radiation levels.
And as usual, a big thank you goes to Jake Collins for voicing the door monster.
Truth will open. Truth will out. Oh.
Very good, team.
Here, here's a drawbridge. Come on, Dickon. Over this way. Pterodactyl. It was a flying moth, wasn't it? Pterodactyl.
As the drawbridge drops and this team sort of departs the room, there are a few scenes like this over the years, but there's this one and then the room that's about to come, where Motley sort of moves them dead center of the drawbridge and then walks along, which you have to assume that there must be some markings on the studio floor to make it clear where he has to walk.
Yeah, if you look at some behind the scenes stuff, they have like tape down.
So I'm assuming that therefore the Dungeoneers themselves will be aware of that as well. They'll know roughly where it is that they're supposed to go, regardless of what the guiders are telling them.
It probably becomes clear to them as they get closer to it. The tape itself is probably going to be pretty hard to spot from any kind of a distance, so they'll get the idea when they get there.
So as they're exiting, Motley says, pterodactyl, that was a flying moth, wasn't it? And I'm thinking, as opposed to a non-flying moth,
I'm just thinking, team, why did you laugh at that?
Pity.
I feel like I'm missing something. I didn't even get that. Is there a pun there that I'm missing?
No.
Right.
Stop, Dickon.
You're in a large room, Dickon. It's there's a pool in front of you which seems to be filled with pretty stagnant water. It's a square pool. To the right of you, there's a man. It looks it's a woman. I can't. No, woman. Looking in a chest, examining things in a chest.
Shh, come on, let's creep round this way, that's right. Come on, Dickon. She won't know as if she can't see us.
Blood buckets! Oh, no, you don't, you nasty little thieves. If you think you can sneak up on me, you've got another thing coming. This is a jolly good sword for butchery, and I'm awfully good at using it.
God, look at the muscles on that. Oh, they don't make girls like that where I come from.
I've often mentioned this theory about Gundrada, but I feel like this scene is possibly her at her most sort of Miranda Richardson and Blackadder, kind of just full-on OTT.
She's quite good at it, though. Samantha Perkins is underrated. Motley runs away, having not really contributed anything at all, and then leaves Dickon on his own to try and fend off Gundrada. I've started to see Gundrada as the true heroine of Knightmare. She got rid of Melisandre in the previous quest. Now she's got rid of Motley from this one.
Yeah, but the problem is she then goes on and again doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to comment on that in a bit. But so, even so, just getting rid of Motley, that makes her good enough for me. Dickon apologises for Motley, saying that he's a bit of a head case. Lines that would be cut completely if the series were made today. Part 99,757.
I've made some notes about this series, and one of them is just one line on its own, and it just says "bit of a head case."
Yes.
It's just, it was of its time.
You just don't use terms like that anymore. I'm sorry. Dickon then tells Gundrada that he's on a quest for the sword, and the team basically correct him and tell him that he's on the quest for the crown.
So I think this is just literally him seeing this big sword that Gundrada's carrying, and just the word sword is in his head.
Yeah, we've all been there where there's something which is so prominent in your mind, it just ends up spilling out of your mouth before you've had a chance to correct yourself.
It reminds me of that scene in Basketball where the lead woman walks in on the guys in the locker room. She starts off by saying, you're going around trying to decide who's got the biggest ego, and then it just slowly dissolves into just randomly saying things like throbbing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's called a Freudian slip, I think is the term we're looking for. Or rather a lot of Freudian slips in this case. So Gundrada draws her enormous throbbing sword.
Just picturing Dickon accidentally saying he's on a quest for the enormous throbbing cock.
Oh, it's like I'm 12 years old.
I follow Gunrada's quest, and as long as you don't get in my way, I'll leave you be. Oh, no, now look what that sneaky little jester's done. He's gone and set the patrols on us. Right, turn round, Dicky, if you want to live.
Well, the other thing that doesn't help the scene is that Gundrada decides to give him a nickname, Dicky. Oh my God! Gundrada takes pity on her little Dicky.
We are adults. We are in our 40s. Honestly.
You need a little bit of innuendo in your life from time to time, though.
Mr. H, this one is your fault, not mine.
The basketball references, but with a point where this all turned.
It turned into Carry On Harder.
God.
So anyway, Gundrada takes pity on Dicky and decides to help him out. And she leads him into the forest via a passive path.
We've got there, we made it.
I think we deserve a medal for getting to the end of that.
Okay, Dickon, we can see you walking to the forest with an eye shield point of view. There's a tree in front of you, so
watch the tree.
dodge it.
Oh, I'm a bit bored with this, Dicky. I'm off. You can do what you like.
This foul-looking place is Dunkley Wood. Best remind us of its hazards, Pickle. After all, you walked there.
Not for many years, Master. And in any case, it looks to have changed. You can find your way back into level 2 from here, team. But only if you find your way across the Dunswater. The elf path should be safe for most of the way. But since the elves left, Ariadne has built her lair across it. We must just hope she's fed recently and is sleeping. Ooh, it makes me shiver just to think of her.
I found that moment really odd, especially because within 2 scenes she's back again. It's like she might as well have just stayed.
I'm rather struggling to see the point of even Gundrada or Motley being in this quest, though. It just seems to be a rather long-winded way of setting up the passive path out of the pool room. If you're going to introduce her there, keep her there, and then rather than having them bump into her again inside Ariadne's lair, have her accompany him to Ariadne's lair. It's almost like they decided, oops, maybe we're making this too easy. Let's drop her out here and then bring her back afterwards. But then why not just introduce her in Ariadne's lair?
I wonder if there are elements of that by this stage they are becoming aware of how repetitive the passive paths are, and anything to just sort of mix things up, have a different voice in there, have something else going on.
The passive path here leads to an elf portal, but it's just another of those video sequences that's been used way too often.
Yeah.
Everyone realizes by now when they're watching it that once the camcorder, I mean the Dungeoneer, has stepped around the tree, an elf portal will come into view in the distance behind it, because that's what it's done about 5 times before. And the last few seconds of the eye shield footage here is almost always used when a Dungeoneer leaves Oakley's glade as well. It's breaking the fourth wall, actually, this amount of repetition. You're making it very obvious that actually there's not very much footage, and you're using it in loads of different places, and so they all become the same place, and you can't really stay immersed with it.
Right, keep going forward.
You're coming to a door.
Keep going.
Okay, Dickon, you're still in the forest. To the left of you, there's a hollow tree trunk with an entrance. So we'll have to direct you there.
Extreme caution, team. You're nearing Ariadne's lair. The strands of her web are extremely sticky. If Dickon touches one, he'll be trapped.
The team maneuver Dickon towards the tree, and of course...
Quick, stop. Okay, go side steps to the left.
Quick.
Quick.
I do like this bit. I mean, there's a lot of samey stuff, but of the sort of samey repetitive things.
Well, there's a fret, isn't there?
Yeah.
That always makes a difference. I should have mentioned, though, I must stress this, whilst I was rewatching this to do the notes last night, I was actually really enjoying the episode. It was much better than a lot of the recent ones.
Part of it's because the team are so likeable.
Yes, the team are very good.
Yeah, they've got a sort of levity about them, whilst also they do the serious stuff well, and they very rarely panic. They just do what needs to be done.
And Dickon is very good at thinking on his feet, as he's about to demonstrate in a couple of scenes' time.
Quick, in.
Right, Dickon, stop.
Oh.
You're in a room which seems to have a roof made out of a spider's web, and there's a woman just to your right. Can you see anything to your right?
Yeah, I can just about see her.
Can you walk over to her, please?
Jolly nice grup here, Dicky. Shame there's not enough for both of us, though. There's some silver here as well, but only enough for one, I'm afraid.
Gundrada's here, so she might just as well have stayed with Dickon and... Just for the sake of argument, here's something that could have made it better. Leave Gundrada out of the pool scene, have Motley help Dickon get out of there, go through that forest scene, use a different portal, a bit of footage maybe, gets to the outside of Ariadne's lair. Ariadne scares Motley off. Then they go inside and run into Gundrada, and that's when Gundrada is used to draw the spider off. I think that would make more sense, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah, although I can't remember if it's before or after this, that there is a scene where Motley is patently not scared of Ariadne and chases her away, but that doesn't necessarily have to be consistent.
The scene you're referring to is my choice for the absolute worst scene ever in Knightmare. If you force that out of Knightmare history, I would not be sorry.
Yeah.
Gundrada, who's obviously got on ahead, is kneeling down, eating food off of the tree stump. Curious how she ran ahead through what must have been the same portal, and yet there was absolutely no sign of her on the eye shield footage. It's almost as if that footage was generic and it isn't a real live feed. The silver also on the stump, but Gundrada's already claimed that. Until...
What is on the tree stump?
There's a sword and a bar of silver.
Ariadne's
Ask her if you can have the food.
That buckets! The lord of the sword mistress fears nothing!
Get the
Nothing
food.
except huge, giant spiders!
Get the food, Dickon.
Get the food.
Well, that was lucky. It looks as though Ariadne has decided that Gundrada makes a better dinner than Dickon does. She certainly has rather more flesh. That's right. Grab the food and make your escape before the spider returns. Quickly, team.
Okay, should we take silver?
Blood buckets. I do like some of Gundrada's nasty
Yeah, blood buckets
explanations
are
like
great.
that. Ariadne chases Gundrada away, leaving Dickon to knapsack the remaining food and take the silver. The team guide him out as pickle centers Ariadne returning. On the subject of Motley not being scared of the spider, doesn't that make Gundrada look a bit pathetic that she is?
Yeah, Although some people do just have an irrational fear of spiders, I suppose.
And to be fair, Motley was absolutely terrified of the snake last series, and that was much smaller.
Once again, though, I do feel the non-player character is kind of removing the challenge from the Dungeoneer. By running off and leading Ariadne away, Gundrada has made it very easy for Dickon to take the items he needs and then just head out. By the time he's gone through the portal, Ariadne still hasn't come back, so he's basically got a clear sweep there. The only thing he's got to do for himself is just pick up an item or two.
I can sense her. She's coming back, Master.
Forward.
Quickly. Stop, Dickon. Right, you're in the forest and there's a door at the back and there's a table at the front with, it looks like it could be mace.
It's a monk. He's dressed as a monk and there's a stool by him. I should think he'll ask you to sit down there.
And there's something on the table.
Welcome, young traveller. Welcome indeed. Come, sit down and join me. Yes, we have bread and a little cheese. No drink, I'm afraid. Come, sit down. Quid agis, young sir? Or is it madam? It's hard to tell with that helmet on. Well, tell me your name anyway. That'll give me a clue.
Dickon.
Ah, Dickon. Dickon, my master, is bought and sold Shakespeare, you know. And I've heard of you, sir. Have you not a brother who's a Dominican?
Yes, I have.
Ah, excellent. Well, give the Reverend Sir my blessings when next you see him. Here, have some bread, young sir, and tell me of your travels.
They arrive in the woodland clearing, which is actually makes a change of order here because you usually wind up with the boatman at this point.
I like this shot of Dickon emerging from the portal. It's very well done.
Yeah, it's different, and it makes the ice shield footage look a bit more real.
All they've done, I think, is they've reversed the footage of the camera going towards the portal, but they've added Dickon in chroma key. And because of the way the entire screen is surrounded by the blackness of the portal at first, it really looks like he's emerging from some void.
And it's the perfect timing on the sound effects as well to enhance that feeling of a sudden rush of movement. Yeah, it is. I do quite like it. I do think it's quite effective. That
it does make you wonder why they didn't do it more, because it's just it looks so good and it strings things together really well.
Maybe it didn't occur to them until this point to try it.
Yeah.
And also, as an extra benefit, it actually moves into one of my favourite scenes in all of season 4.
Yeah, it's a great scene, this one.
This is a really famous scene, and it's a very, very popular one.
Dickon asks if the monk is brother Mace, and Mace seems absolutely made up that the young Dungeoneer has heard of him.
A couple of points here. Firstly, Mace mentions Shakespeare. How would a monk from the age of the Franciscans possibly know about Shakespeare? He wasn't born until about 400 years later. But as I said before, I love this scene, and it's not least because Dickon is really playing his part in it for all it's worth.
Yeah.
He does it. It does it in a way that very, very few Dungeoneers have ever before or since ever do it. He's genuinely great at Dungeoneering. He is. See, listeners, I do love Knightmare, really.
He's sort of engaged, he's alive, and he's part of it. And also because I think Michael Kuehl is like massively underrated as a sort of ad-lib improvising actor, and you can tell he's in his element. He's just enjoying the interaction.
There's also a really good chemistry between Dickon and Michael Kuehl, which you shouldn't miss. Both of them are ad-libbing really brilliantly.
Yeah.
You don't really expect Dungeoneers to ad-lib at all, but here, Dickon is basically coming up with most of it himself. And it's clever and it's really well timed, and it actually makes it easier for Michael to do his part of the script to keep the scene moving in the right direction. It's really, really slick, this scene, which is very unusual because the Dungeoneers are usually so stilted in their delivery. These sorts of things sort of go stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. No, this conversation really flows, and it makes it much more entertaining to watch, much more engaging.
There's that line about is your brother a Dominican, which is just lovely.
It's brilliant.
Yeah, go for the brandy push. Yeah. Go for the brandy push.
Would you like some 50-year-old Etruscan brandy?
So it's very strong.
Brandy? Why, what a generous child. It's very kind of you. It's very green.
Tell him it's because it's been so vintage.
It's because it's so vintage. 50-year-old Etruscan brandy always goes green.
Really? Well, what a mine of culinary information you are. Well, you are quite a little gastronome. My word.
May seems a little suspicious when Dickon hands over the bottle, noting that it seems a tad more green than most brandies. Dickon, quick thinking again, tells him that trusted brandy always goes green when it's properly aged. That is genius ad-libbing. It's really quick thinking on his feet. I so wish more Dungeoneers could have been like this. I understand why they weren't. They were very young.
But just to sort of, in response to that, to just sort of ad lib, quite a little gastronome. It's just to have that just there, ready to pop out as a line.
I think Mace is just starting to sound a little bit like the Androgums from Doctor Who at that point. But yeah, a mine of culinary information. I wonder if that was actually scripted or if he just had lived that one.
50-year-old Etruscan brandy. That's a very interesting odour. Would you care for a sip yourself?
No, thanks. I don't drink.
Non-alcoholic.
Oh,
yeah.
you have taken a vow. Well, my vow is precisely the opposite vow. So if you will just excuse me for a moment, I will. Thank you. Oh, that was most. That was.
Let's hope for the monk's sake it was only a joke. In any case, this is not a place to linger. That's an awfully large lizard, and in that form, Brother Mace could well get quite annoyed.
Mace takes the cork out and notes an interesting odour. He offers Dickon a drink himself, and Dickon tells him that he doesn't drink. If there's one weak bit of the scene, it's that, because you have to award Mace a stupid point for not asking why a guy who doesn't drink is wandering through the forests of the land with a bottle of brandy and apparently almost nothing else. But never mind.
I mean, if he's taken a vow to strong drink, then I suppose at that point you won't be thinking particularly clearly. It's just, give me the drink.
When he's craving it, yeah, he's wanting to think the best.
I think there's also the when he takes the swig, which is it shows that technically he's absolutely tuned in, even though he's fully improvising the scene, is when he takes the swig and puts the bottle back down, when it will become obvious that he hasn't actually drunk any of the green liquid. It's just out of shot of the camera, so you can no longer see the contents of the bottle. It's very well done.
You can see when he lifts it up that he doesn't actually drink any, but you have to be actually looking to realise that.
Mace tells the Dungeoneer that his vow is precisely the opposite vow and takes a swig from the bottle. A pained expression comes across Mace's face as he slowly transforms into a giant lizard.
A pained expression comes across Mace's face as he slowly transforms into a member of the royal family.
Yeah, okay. Okay, David Icke, enough from you.
Take me to your lizard.
One of the sort of downsides of the fact that when you are creating a scene like that and you have a pre-recorded bit of footage of a lizard, it's totally still. When I would imagine if you were turned into a lizard, you would at the very least move a little bit, maybe lift your hands in front of your face.
It works for 1990. So Dickon takes the food and exits via another passive path. I do feel a bit bad for Mace after he's been so nice to them for the rest of the scene, but that's Knightmare in its most characteristic, isn't it? It's seldom fair.
It does seem a bit off, doesn't it?
Hold up the eye shield.
Hold up the eye shield. And
all
walk
right,
towards the door.
Okay.
Okay, Dickon, stop. You're at a very large stream, river really, I suppose, and in front of you there is a boat with a ferryman in it. He's calling you across, I think.
Deep is the Dunswater and cold. The fare for the crossing is silver or gold.
Dickon hands the ferryman the silver and climbs into the boat. The ferryman then begins to row Dickon across.
The KM realm is clearly going for a period of monetary deflation because previously the toll was silver and gold.
Maybe the boat's getting too heavy.
That'll be it. I bet the implication is that the boatman resembles Karian, the devil who ships dead souls to hell across the River of Soul.
I think that's pretty clear.
Presumably, we're being made to think that the Tower of Time is the entrance to hell.
For me, the transition from level 2 to 3 in Series 3 is brilliant. It's one of the best ever of any sort of level movement. The downside of this, which is true of a lot of Season 4, is that when you compare it to the minecart in season 3, it's so slow. From the moment they arrive at the banks of the river, you know that the next 2 to 3 minutes of television are going to be a pre-recorded boat crossing and then a pre-recorded trip down some stairs. And this is them entering the most exciting level. This is them moving to the final level of conflict.
Let's not forget Traegard saying how difficult it is going to be to find the entrance to level 3 when they're standing on the staircase to level 3.
You're just coming up to the entrance to the castle, or whatever it is, palace, I think.
All right, Dickon, you've just come through what looks like an archway in a castle, possibly. Just about to land from the boat.
The boat does pull into dock and Dickon climbs out. The passive path then takes over. And again, Traegard does his speech about finding the way down to level 3, despite the fact the passive path is clearly showing Dickon's about to go down some steps into level 3.
That was a long search, wasn't it?
If somebody said that speech to me while I was standing at the top of the stairs, my first thought would be, there must be some other way down because this is too obvious.
Caution, Dickon, stay right where you are. You see, we can see you, but we can't see what you're standing on. Now look down beneath the helmet and tell us what you see.
I'm on a grey paving stone, and there's 2 other red paving stones either side of me.
Yes, of course, it's a transporter pad. Step right for one journey, step left for another.
Don't forget, though, Dickon, return always to the middle, or the journey may be longer than you'd intended.
Anyway, things rapidly improve at this point because we arrive at what I still think is one of the best chambers to be created in season 4. It did have its redeeming qualities, and the transporter pad room is definitely one of them.
I do think that they could have changed it up a little bit, like having the knight standing on a different platform.
Yeah. But I'm okay with it. And the reason why I'm okay with it is because it's not just one of the better chambers in the season. It's also one of the more difficult to actually realize with 1990 technology.
Yeah.
You basically got different parts of the studio being filmed separately and then having to be merged into one image as live. So that makes it extremely difficult to juggle things up a bit, given we're talking 33 years ago, and the sort of very, very primitive computer technology that there was still at that point. I think it's remarkably well done.
And it's such a good looking room, and there's an element of what might have been with this, and with the bridge that goes across with the same backdrop, which it makes you wonder. I don't know whether they had an idea of having that as a repeated backdrop for a lot of the level and they just ran out of time, or if it was because the idea of that being a level which sort of all goes around that waterfall kind of scene is a lovely idea, and it would look brilliant.
There is one platform below the one he's standing on and 2 platforms to his right, upon the lower of which is a knight swinging his sword. And the exit is below on the right. The exit is below on the left.
This is a beautiful looking room, but one minor criticism, which is a repeat of what happened when Alistair was standing on there earlier in the series. When they do the close-up and you can see the feet standing on the platform, I don't know how feasible it would have been to just have some graphics around that rather than just a black studio floor, which kind of lightly spoils the illusion of if you step forward, you're going to drop off this pad.
Again, it breaks the fourth wall, which is a shame. You're quite right. The effects have been updated since last time I saw this chamber, because we've now, rather than simply disappearing and reappearing on a different platform, little Dicky briefly fades out of existence and then emerges from a bolt of lightning onto the lower platform. Bolts of lightning for people to make a dramatic entrance become a major and regular feature in Knightmare from the next season onwards, but it actually really starts here. So it's a sort of teleportation effect. He's now standing on the platform above the knights. I still think the quickest route for doing this chamber is simply to keep going left. I'm pretty sure that if they just use the left path on the original stone, they'd have immediately appeared on the ledge immediately below. But the teleportation effects are a welcome addition because it does make it look a lot more sorcerous.
I think if he had done that, he would have appeared mid-air.
Do you?
On the left and fallen, yeah.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know for sure, obviously, because it never happened.
There's nothing to indicate it, is it?
It would be a bold thing to do as well, wouldn't it? When there's obviously a clear platform to your right at that point, that seems like the thing you should do.
So having stepped to his left, Dickon disappears and again reappears on the platform opposite the knight. Just one more move to make, but would it lead to exit or oblivion? Now, you notice here that Dickon disappears as soon as he steps left without having moving back to the middle first. I do sometimes wonder why it does that. In reality, of course, we know Dickon is really spending the whole scene just stood on those 3 flagstones. The optical trickery is actually very elaborate for the time to make him appear as at different points in the chamber.
Because they're presenting it as live as well. They're applying that trickery.
He disappeared as soon as he steps left because that's where the blue screen is.
Oh, right, okay. Why wasn't it there on the previous ones? Because remember, in reality, he's just staying exactly where he is.
I don't know. I mean, you'd think they would have it slowly step left and then step back and then they move the screen across.
Yeah.
I think they just probably didn't think of it.
Yes! Brilliant. You're at the door now, so just
he's going to have to dodge that he doesn't stand on that one.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Turn to your left, 90 degrees. That's right. Can you see the thing on the floor below you?
Yes.
Right, if you can walk over that and through the door.
So you don't touch that.
Yeah. Don't touch that tile.
Don't touch it.
Okay. Where am I?
You're in a circular room, and there's a table in front of you, and on that table there appears to be some kind of file, which you might walk over to.
They arrive in the circular castle chamber, which may feel a bit of a letdown after having fun with the transporter pads. This is the first time we've seen this chamber in this quest, so we'll treat it as okay for now.
Just on the proviso that they don't end up going back into it another 4 times.
Ah, is that the proviso?
Yeah.
I wish you
We
told
may
us that
have a
33
problem.
years ago. Anyway, with no other objects available, the team advised Dickon to pick a bottle up because it's got poison written on it. As he does so...
Oh, but this is awful. Time turns, Master, but they can't stop now.
Can and must pickle, for time waits for no man. Well, do you think they're going to make it? Or even more important, can you afford not to be in at the kill? If you know the answer, then you know the remedy, don't you?
This is the beginning of one of the more interesting object puzzles.
It is. It's actually quite a clever one, I think. We'll see more about that in the next episode. Tragard, once again, seems to be signing off in the mirror.
So weird, isn't it? I don't know why they've done it.
I don't know. It's also he's looking into a mirror, which is exactly the right angle to reflect into the camera.
So the credits play over the image of some caves on a cliff, including a small waterfall, and the arrangement of rock and cave openings gives the impression of a face.
What I'm thinking here is, because it's a waterfall, could that actually be connected with the mega cavern? Could it have been somewhere they were going to use near the end of a quest?
I couldn't work out watching it. Is it a real thing or is it a graphic? It looks real.
I think it's a mixture. I think, again, the water is probably real, but I actually think it's chiefly hand-drawn as far as I can tell, which is good. I prefer these to have something unreal about them.
But it looks like what maybe Olgarth or Granitas could have become with slightly better hand-drawn graphics.
So a hand-drawn Granitas rather than
a rubber mask.
A rubber mask.
There's something quite tantalizing about just having that and just using it once for closing credits and then never ever revisiting it.
It's a bit like the one with the gigantic swinging axe over the top of a
yeah.
pathway as well. I'd love to have seen that one being used for real.
Did I read somewhere that was used for real once and it was too hard, so they just kind of had to abandon it, the swinging axe?
That's what I'd heard. They used a version of the chamber in one of the international versions, but I don't think they had the axe.
So I think it was, maybe it was Giles or someone from Giles's team. They appeared on one of the forums once and were talking a little bit about their quest.
It's Brett. I think you think
Brett. Yeah.
You can find quite a lot of his posts on there.
Yeah, I think he made reference to that chamber, that they did actually record it, but it didn't work, or there was something about it that just made it impossible, and they ended up not using it.
I think one of the issues with it would have been the same as there was with the original Hall of Spears in season 1. Even when the axe was swinging around behind you, you would still like you were in front of it on the picture. Anyway, I would say this is definitely among the best episodes of season 4, and it shows what a massive difference it makes having a good dungeoneer who can really interact with the non-player characters, shown mainly in the scenes of both Mace and Gundrada. Although the head case reference, I think, is best left in the past. Dickon is in no way overawed or frozen stiff by being on camera. Actually, I think you could argue he adds a dimension to the scripted parts of the quest, especially in the brandy scene. Some clever improvisation. It would never have crossed my mind to suggest that of a different kind of monk or anything. The argument distracts well from how samey most of the level 2 scenes are here, because they are. The episode also ends on a strong note, with the transporter pad scene working very well as a starter to level 3, and it really leads us into the final stages of the quest very neatly, setting up a really exciting moment for the next episode to start. On the flip side, it's brought down a bit by having to start with yet another someone in the pillory scene, made even worse by it being Motley, of course. Although I do rather enjoy Motley being in a pillory. One or two appearances by the NPCs also don't make much sense, as we pointed out, with Gondrada and Motley being in and out of it. And the lack of flexibility in the locations in level 2 remains a bit patience testing. But all in all, we've got a very good team getting the most out of what season 4 offers. That may not be a huge amount compared with, say, season 2, but it's enough.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with what you said. I think in the context of this series, it's one of the very best episodes. And I think, again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, I wonder if there is an element of having a sibling there with you actually helps to relax you and make you a little bit more confident, and that maybe Dickon benefited from having his brother there and sort of feeling like he could relax into it rather than just being out there on your own and not having, somebody to put a hand on your shoulder and tell you that you're doing all right.
The NPCs do feel a bit useless. It does seem as if they put them in because they're under contract in some places, but the team are good. The banter between the team is good. Even the banter between Dickon and other characters is good, especially the Brother Mace scene is a standout scene.
Definitely.
It's an episode which single-handedly raises the average score of this series.
On its own, yeah. I'd also say that something we haven't mentioned yet, I actually think it's faster paced than a lot of the recent stuff.
Although that can be seen as a negative in some places, such as with the previous quest, I think at this point it's an advantage.
Definitely.
It does slow down a little bit in level 3, but that's mainly because level 3 is a genuine challenge.
Yeah, because you see that in series 3 as well. And you think of some of the good quests in there, like Martin's quest. They are having to stop and think about what they're doing in level 3 rather than just acting on instinct and flying through chambers. If it's slow for a good reason, that's fine. If it's slow just because there's a load of passive paths, then that's not good Knightmare.
So, thumbs up then. We rather like that episode, I think, is the bottom line.
If you've enjoyed the podcast, please give us a rating and review on your platform of choice. It really helps us grow our audience by reaching others who might be interested.
You can follow us on Twitter. We're at Knightmare Pod, and our Mastodon is topspicy.social at Knightmare Pod.
Yeah, notice we didn't say X.
Surely people are going to stop doing that sooner. It's just so ridiculous.
I refuse. I'll be in the cold, hard ground before I recognize X. It's a bit ironic that someone who seriously dead names his own children is complaining about people dead naming his website.
I know.
Just to reiterate things, we have no love for the way Twitter is at the moment. But it remains the best way for us to keep in touch with our fans and to grow as a podcast.
If you want to support the podcast, we're Knightmare Pod on Patreon.
Speaking of Patreon, here's a shout out to keepers of the Book of Quests, David N. Rabbit, Paul McIntosh,
I've heard of him,
Peter Pulsford, and Scott Evans.
Advisors, Benjamin Bloom, David Thompson, Kim Harder, what a silly surname. Peter Sidorn, Paul Cratty, Lord Entropy, where the O is a 0, please note, and Stephen Whelan.
And let's not forget Dungeoneers. We have an extra one, Peter Corridge and Adam Battersby.
Support us on Patreon at Dungeoneer level or above to get your name mentioned on the podcast. Higher level perks also receive merchandise, have access to exclusive episodes, and if you pledge as a keeper of the Book of Quests, we'll even offer you the chance to be a guest on the podcast. Imagine that, being a guest on the greatest, most popular podcast on the internet, or hours is whilst you're waiting.
Our website is nightmarepod.co.uk.
If you're looking for temporal discussion merchandise, and let's face it, who wouldn't be, including t-shirts, stickers, and other products, it's at nightmarepod.redbubble.com.
You can email us at podcast@nightmarepod.co.uk.
And just keep telling yourself,
it's only a podcast.
Isn't it? Throbbing cock.